Welcome to week 7. I have a haircut. We have a new guest, but an old friend, Ryan Hester. Welcome back. And then Phil, it's always good to see you, buddy. I was off last week. I'm back. You guys are stuck with me, but Ryan is the fan favorite. He's the heartthrob with those pearly white teeth. He's going to drive the ship tonight and host. So, Ryan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm sorry that Jeff isn't here, but on one hand, but happy to be here myself. So thanks for calling me in from the bullpen. This year's been a little busier, a little different, a little less fantasy football for me. So thanks for letting me host and kick it to you guys as analysts here tonight. I think that we're all probably in better roles this evening, just considering the amount of that I'm playing this year versus past years. I'd rather hear from you guys too. So it'll help me out with the volume I've got to be hosting tonight. So thanks for having me. Really happy to be back, and let's just get right into it. So let's start at the top with games we're targeting, and then we'll get into the key pieces of those games, of course, too. But Phil, we have an ugly slate. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I was just going to say you came back and you picked a gross slate, Ryan, to rejoin us here. We've got 6 teams on the bye, and out of the 10 games that we have left, half of those have totals of 40 points or fewer. So pickings are slim. We got no over-unders north of 50 points. The closest thing that we've got is Chargers at Chiefs, which is a 49-point total, and I think that's definitely going to be the public game, even though the pieces there are pretty expensive. There's Green Bay at Denver with a 45-point total. That one could kind of go either way. You've got 2 bad teams there, and sometimes that results in a bad football game, but sometimes it results in points because neither one could stop each other. Arizona at Seattle looks okay. Steelers at Rams looks pretty good, relative to the slate, of course. And I'll give you my one weekly sneaky overplay of the week, and that is Vegas at Chicago to go over 37.5 points with 2 backup quarterbacks.
You are a brave man targeting and potentially even watching a moment of that game. Devin, any others that Phil left off that pique your interest?
No, I think the Rams and the Steelers, as well as the Seahawks and Cardinals, are the games that I like, that are cheap, that we're going to see some points this week. I don't know what to do with the Packers Broncos. Like, that theoretically should see some points, but both of those offenses are just so bad that it's hard to really trust. But we'll see. I think that it's a week where this whole year it's just been like, be smart and go after guys who are underpriced, go after guys who are going to see volume. And outside of like Devin Achan's couple of weeks where he busts 70-yard runs on like 6 carries, it's been a pretty easy. I don't want to say easy, but it's been a pretty straightforward season. I'm sure Phil is getting crushed because the chalk keeps hitting, but from a cash game perspective, my cracking FanDuel lineups are killing it. So I can only blame Dorian Thompson-Robinson for this haircut. I'm 5-1 in the season. I said I wasn't going to get a haircut until I lost, which I think this is the first time I'm on camera since losing. But we won two straight weeks, so we're back. Back 5-1. I give out my cash game week lineup every week at footballguys.com. So if you are a cash game player and struggling, come look at a Football Guys subscription.
Yeah, and typically a couple of lineup options in there as well, in case
Yeah,
for whatever reason only track the one, but Devin gives options, right? In case for whatever reason you don't want to be 5-1 through 6 weeks of the season, right? It gives you some optionality there. So now we've talked games, guys. Let's get into the players we like, either in those games or others, right? There's obviously other games that are going to help us fit the key pieces of those ones. So Devin, let's kick it back to you real quick. Are you going to recommend a quarterback better than Dorian Thompson-Robinson this week?
It depends on better, but I'm recommending the guy that they gave up for Cleveland gave up on for Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and that's Josh Dobbs going up against Seattle. So Cleveland kicked him to the curb. He's been better than I think most people had expected. This could be his last week as a starter with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray sort of returning to practice. Who knows when he'll return? But Josh Dobbs, last week, 235 yards passing, 47 yards rushing. I'm primarily looking at the rushing upside here. So if I think about Seattle's offense or Seattle's defense, they're a defense that started out really bad, and they allowed 320 yards or more to Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, and Andy Dalton. And we picked on them in all of those 3 weeks. And then they faced Daniel Jones and Joe Burrow, and they've sort of turned a little bit of a table. So, holding Daniel Jones at 203, and then I don't know what Joe Burrow's stat lines are anymore because he had 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I'm primarily looking though. What intrigues me is Daniel Jones rushing for 66 yards against this defense. This is a defense that doesn't have the pass rush that they used to. They're very young in the secondary, and it's a defense in which Dobbs at 5,300 doesn't need to do all that much in order to get to cash game viability on DraftKings this week. On FanDuel, probably not looking his way. I'm probably spending up a little bit more. But I think on DraftKings, he's the primary guy, although his price on FanDuel is attractive at 66. The other guy that I'm looking at this week is Sam Howell going up against the Giants. Sam Howell's been interesting because he has upside against bad defenses. So he threw for 388 and 2 against the Bears, 299 and 2 against the Broncos. But against better defenses, he just gets sacked too much. He's on pace to break David Carr's NFL sack record by a pretty wide margin. So is he going to stay healthy for the entire year? Odds are probably not. But against bad defenses, we have seen him have big games, and the Giants secondary is one that is exploitable. We've seen them, give up 300 yards to Brock Purdy and Tua Tagovailoa this season. So, and Josh Dobbs had 23 DraftKings points against them as well. So we'll see. But I can't find the way to spend up at quarterback this week. I'd rather spend it in other positions.
Yeah, Phil, you made a dry heaving gesture when Devin said Josh Dobbs a minute and a half ago. So tell me about that.
I can't do it with Josh Dobbs in cash. I think Russell Wilson's $100 more. And at that point, before last Thursday's game, and Thursday games are usually kind of ugly, he had 4 straight with at least 18 DraftKings points. He's flashed a 30-point ceiling this season. That defense continues to get him into trouble and forces him to keep his foot on the pedal. The matchup against Green Bay that he's got is neutral, but they're at home. Vegas is telling us it should be the second highest scoring game on the slate. He just seems a lot safer to get you to that 18 to 20 point range. And I think he has more upside. I mean, Josh Dobbs over the last 2 weeks, I think the shine is off of his surprising start. 46.9% completion rate, 51.2% in his last 2 games. He's been sacked 5 times, turned the ball over 3 times. He is rushing. So I'm with Devin there, and that'll probably get him close to 1x on its own. I just don't know if now that teams have seen some film on Josh Dobbs, if it's not just completely over for him in the NFL. I think that Kyler Murray's about to come back at a pretty opportune time.
Yeah, good calls there. Let me, even though I'm just the host tonight, toss something in here. The games you guys talked about, there was mention of Rams Steelers. I know that it wasn't the Steelers offense that was the attractive side there, but it's a 44-point total. Rams favored by 3. No running game to speak of, I don't think, right? Unless believe in Zach Evans or Darrell Henderson or Royce Freeman. So Matthew Stafford to me seems like a great candidate for the 300-yard bonus on DraftKings and 3 points there. I think he's 6,500. So modestly priced, probably a little more than you'd like, but buy down a defense by a couple hundred. That's a crapshoot, anyways, right? So Matthew Stafford's one that kind of piqued my interest. We know where it's going with the Rams. It's Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and Kyron Williams is out. So just seems like very concentrated. Maybe he's a little bit cheaper access than 9,500 to Cooper Kupp. So Stafford was one that kind of popped up to me. Let's move on to running backs. And Phil, why don't you get us started on the running back position for cash plays?
Sure. My first guy is Kenneth Walker at 7,000 on DraftKings. I'm a little bit nervous about what happens if he manages to not find the end zone at an elevated price this week, but he's got 6 touchdowns in his last 5 games. Arizona has allowed a total of 9 touchdowns to running backs in 6 games. So you put those 2 facts together, and I think he seems really safe. And there's also the matter of Seattle being favored by more than a touchdown at home. So we have every reason to expect one of Walker's better games this season. And I'll throw in there, too, that Zach Charbonnet has not practiced as of today. So if he's trending towards missing that game, that pads the floor a little bit more for Kenneth Walker. Elsewhere, I think it looks like a week to pay up at running back, which is maybe why Devin was willing to get so down and dirty with Josh Dobbs at quarterback, which I totally do understand the paying down at quarterback part, at least, if not the Josh Dobbs part. But Josh Jacobs, his workloads have been crazy bankable this season. You know that you're getting at least 75% of the team's rush attempts. You're getting a double-digit target share. And the latest report was that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to miss this game. And the beat writers that I was reading made it sound like it's probably an Aiden O'Connell start. And if that's the case, I think that's a big boost for Jacobs, because O'Connell was a checkdown machine in his only other start this season. Jacobs had 11 targets and 81 receiving yards in week 4 with O'Connell under center. And then you have the Bears defense, which is a cooperative one. They allow 30% more DraftKings points to opposing running backs than league average this year. So I think that you got to plug those 2 in, and then I'll kind of kick it over to you guys, and we'll talk about what we're doing in the flex. I do have one more name I want to mention, and we'll see if it gets brought up here.
Yeah, Devin, who do you have at running back? Are you paying up there or receiver or some combo of both?
Yeah, I'm trying to pay up at the receiver position. I don't mind Kenneth Walker. I think he's fine. The matchup is good, especially if Charbonnet is out. So I think that's probably a spot that Phil is all over. I can't get behind Josh Jacobs. He just isn't Josh Jacobs to me. Like, he's not the guy from last year. There's too much inconsistency, and I think the floor at a $7,400 price point is a little too low for paying up to that price. Jerome Ford is a guy that I'm looking at 5,100. I think that we saw last week, a lot of people wrote him off, and they, after the Pittsburgh game where he broke the long touchdown, a lot of people just said, "Hey, he's just a guy who's going to score a long touchdown and be sort of dependent on that." You look at the matchups that he has faced. He's faced Tennessee, Baltimore, and San Francisco in his last 3 games. In his only 3 games since Nick Chubb has been out, those are 3 of the better run defenses in the NFL. And he's finally getting a matchup that is good, if not great, against the Colts this week. With whether it's Deshaun Watson or PJ Walker, I don't think really matters. But last week we saw Ford have 84 yards rushing against the 49ers. I think he, at that price, can do enough to get there. Jahmyr Gibbs is interesting at 6,300. I don't love him, but David Montgomery, I believe, is out, right?
It will be, yes.
That's confirmed. So,
I believe so.
Okay. So if David Montgomery is out, then I think Gibbs will be popular. But Do we trust him at that price? Probably not. I would rather go Isaiah Pacheco at 6,100. A lot of people just completely dismiss the Kansas City rushing game, and it's because of the Damian Williams, Darrell Williams, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like all this garbage that we've had to deal with the last several years. But you look at Pacheco and 15 carries, 20 carries, 16 carries, 16 carries over his last 4 games. He caught 6 passes last week. He's getting the volume of a guy who should be more expensive than
Yeah.
he is at 6,100. And going back to like just keeping things simple, I'm just looking for touches. And, for a guy to get 18 to
Except
20
except
touches.
when it's Josh Jacobs, or
But Jacobs, it's
he
a
gets a
higher
ton of
price.
touches.
At 7,400, I mean,
I get it.
we've seen Jacobs where, yeah, he had 25 touches last week in a favorable game script. Is this going to be a sloppy game? He's averaging 2.9 yards per carry. Like, this is, I don't know. I don't want a running back at 7,400 that's averaging less than 3 yards per carry. So, and then the last guy, I'll take a shot on Zach Evans, $4,000. I don't believe like this whole. Who did they go out and sign?
Darrell
Miles
Henderson.
Gaskin, Darrell Henderson,
Yeah.
and then Royce Freeman's there. Like, these guys are just guys. They're filler in case they're guys who can quickly learn a playbook and jump in and fill in on short notice. I think they give Zach Evans the first crack, and at $4,000, why not? Like, it allows you for a lot more from a build perspective than spending up. So Ford, Pacheco, Evans. If you wanted to go Walker, I wouldn't blame you either.
Okay.
Yeah. So Evans was the guy that I wanted to talk about and gauge where you guys were at on him, because I think whether you're starting a build like myself where you're paying up for 2 running backs, or like Devin where you're finding a little bit more value and you want to pay up at wide receiver, in either case, you're probably going to end up flexing a $4,000 player or someone in that range. And I think the candidates are Evans and probably Curtis Samuel. But I think that Evans, for me, is definitely the better play, too. He's just a guy who's more equipped to be a feature back than any of the washouts that they brought in, like Devin said. I do think he gets the first opportunity, and I think he would have to do something completely horrendous, like get Matthew Stafford blown up on the first play or something like that, not to continue to roll with that job. So a little bit of uncertainty there for Cash, but I agree that it's a spot where we should embrace it. He should see a lot of touches.
Yeah, man, it just wouldn't shock me at all if you just suddenly like look at 5 o'clock and you open your Twitter timeline and be like, "Where's Zach Evans?" You just see a random tweet. It's like, "Is Zach Evans hurt?" Why does Darrell Henderson have 11 carries in the second quarter
for 19 yards?
Yeah, I mean, likely so. Yeah, if the guy had any juice, left, he'd still be on the team before this week. But yeah, I'm with you guys. You got to price adjust these things, and 4,000 just allows for. Even if
even if you miss,
split,
right? 4,000 doesn't hurt you all that bad.
Correct.
Like if
exactly.
if you get 5 or 6 points in cash, like I'm taking it, and I'm just like, okay, fine. It allows me to go and get Cooper Kupp, who we will talk about very shortly.
Yeah, and the other thing that at running back at least versus going to the bottom of the barrel at wide receiver, even if we assume some sort of split, Evans maybe sees 7 to 10 touches. It's not like a 3K crapper wide receiver who might see 2 targets and not catch a ball. Like they could literally get 0 points. Whereas I don't think that's going to happen with Evans. Knock on wood. All right. In the interest of allowing you guys to alternate on who starts first, Devin, kick us off at wide receiver, where you will start with Cooper Kupp. So be quick on that because I think we know. And then anyone else you want to kick into?
Yeah, play Cooper Kupp. He's the top guy. Most consistent wide receiver. I'm not buying into Puka Nacua. Like I don't think he's a thing. He had the one good game, but like if you watched last week, he's just like a complete check down type of guy. they tried to force him the ball very early on in that game, and then in the second half, they basically just said forget it and just kept throwing the Cup.
There's still a world though where Cooper Kupp gets 18 targets and Puka Nacua still gets 10 this week. I mean, they're just their target tree is so thin. There's a world where that happens. I agree. But anyways, this is a Cooper Kupp segment.
Yeah, it'd have to be a weird game script. I think. I don't think they're gonna.
That's true.
Higbee's
Steelers
still
aren't
there,
push
and
him.
I'll just keep going.
Yep.
Josh Palmer, I think, is interesting at 4,800. You look at what's happened since Mike Williams has been out, and people have been afraid of the Quentin Johnson saga, I guess I could call it, and he's just not ready. Palmer has 60 yards in each of his last 3 games, 7 targets or more in each of those games, so 4,800 to get that is somewhat intriguing. Drake London, 5,100. I think this is the first time I've ever recommended Drake London on the history of this show, but he's really trying. Most people forget he was the number eighth overall pick last year, and we're starting to see him emerge. 78 yards against Houston 2 weeks ago, 125 last week. Desmond Ridder looks a little bit better. They're 9 targets or more in each of the last 2 games. So 5,100 for a guy who was a top 10 pick just less than a year ago, I think is interesting. I don't think Atlanta will be able to run the ball. Bijan Robinson has been pretty disappointing, to say the least, compared to where I think most people had anticipated that he would be at this point. So I think he's I think he's a guy who you could potentially look at. Kendrick Bourne is going to see some popularity. I'm not going there just because I don't trust anything in this Patriots offense, but if you wanted to look that way, you could. And then I'll throw one more out there. If I'm spending up at Cup and I'm going down to Palmer and or London, I do have a little bit of flexibility here as far as salary goes. I think Zay Flowers is at least interesting in taking Jeff Bell's favorite player in the NFL, because I think he's mentioned him every single week. But Flowers has just been consistent. I think he's a guy who, you can lock in for 50 to 60 yards. He's going to get you 4 to 5 catches. Nothing all that sexy, but if he can find the end zone, again, find guys who aren't going to kill you that have upside, and 10 to 12 points certainly isn't going to be the worst case at his 5,700 price point. It's a little higher than I would like, but he's another guy that I potentially would look at.
Phil, any quibbles?
Not necessarily. I have a lot of the same names as Devin in my lineup as well, so I'll just throw in some factoids to build upon what he said real quick. I would be petrified to enter a cash game without Cooper Kupp in my lineup this week. Like, really nervous when I flip over the lineups and I don't have Cooper Kupp and my opponent does. Since coming back, 42% of the team's targets, 52% of the air yards. The Steelers allow the 3rd most yards to wide receivers, 5th highest yards per reception and receiving touchdowns. It is Cooper Kupp week for certain. Zay Flowers was also the second guy in my wide receiver spot. The Lions defense is much improved, but I'm going to turn this into a Baker Mayfield segment, much to Devin's chagrin. The Lions defense is much improved, but they got lucky not to get smoked off the field last week, because the Tampa Bay wide receivers were running wide open to daylight multiple times. And because Baker Mayfield is so bad.
Let's go.
It looks like the Lions defense was a lot better than it was, but he should have had 4 touchdowns and 400 yards if he was league average. But even with Mayfield making them look better, the Lions have allowed 28% more DraftKings points to wide receivers than league average over the last 3. Flowers' average target depth has doubled over the last 3 games, and his target share has maintained around the 30% range. So he's now more like a true wide receiver 1. And then for the 3rd slot, you could go down to Palmer. Or if you have the $500, I think you could go up to Marquise Brown. He's coming off a down game, but now 10 targets or 10 plus targets in 3 straight. His price never budges. It's been in that low 5,000 range for weeks and weeks. The Cardinals have no running game to speak of without James Conner, and in all likelihood, they're going to be playing catch up to Seattle. So I think Brown at least gives you a high floor.
Yeah, those are all great calls. I have one more. If you don't want to stomach going down to Josh Dobbs at QB, you could go at wide receiver. Wan'Dale Robinson for the Giants, 3,800. So Washington has given up sixth most points to wide receivers this year. So the matchup's good. He's playing a lot more after coming back from injury. 20% and 26% of the team targets over the last 2 games. And ran a route on 73% of dropbacks last week. So, he's going to give you the face Devin gave you, where it's just like, do I really want to play this guy?
6 yards a catch.
Hey, but
He
at
catches
full
5 balls, like, you'll take
on
it.
a full PPR site, if we get 5 and 30
I get it.
on a 3.8 salary, 3,800 salary, like we're there. It's not at all intended to be sexy, nor will it be. But if you want to bank 14 points at 3,800, he's a guy that can do it.
How's he banking 14 points?
Well, not 14. Let's call it 10.
If he gets you 5 catches for 30 yards, you're happy.
That's reasonable.
2.2.
I think he can do a little more. I think he can do a little more than that.
Well, I think it's safe.
10,
I think that's
right?
he has
safe.
upside
It's
for more, but if he can get you that, if I told you I will guarantee 5 for 30, you're like, okay.
Yeah, but again, it's either he and Marquise Brown or Josh Dobbs and Matt Stafford, right? So, sorry, I might have done that wrong.
Yeah,
it's either he and Matt Stafford or Josh Dobbs and Marquise Brown. So that sort of play, right? I like to offer at least one at all levels for the people. So let's move on to tight ends, cash game plays here, gentlemen. I think it's Phil's turn to start. I may have messed this up, even though I just said we had a rotation going. Phil, go ahead, tight end.
Yeah, so just to recap, I went low at quarterback, high at running back, Cup at wide receiver, and then 2 mid-range guys. So that means I'm going cheap at tight end to Luke Musgrave at 3,300. With the way that the construction works on this slate, I think that Musgrave at 3,300, he has like just as good a chance of appearing in the optimal as guys like Andrews and Kelsey, who are much better players. But he'll be on the field, for 70 to 80% of Jordan Love's dropbacks. And the most important part is that he's playing the Broncos. They seem like the ideal matchup for tight ends every year. But this year, they're just really the worst by a mile. John Bates put up 46 yards on them, 85 and 2 touchdowns for Cole Kmet, 67 yards for Tyler Conklin a couple weeks ago. And then, of course, Travis Kelsey just like completely stole their lunch money last Thursday. So Musgrave's a guy that I think as the season goes along, he should start doing more and more with his targets and playing time. And that's where I'm going this week.
Agreed there. Devin, anyone else?
Yeah, I'm going cheaper. Michael Mayer.
It's
not
Michael
Halloween
Myers.
yet.
Hey, it's getting close to Halloween.
Yeah,
Michael
that
Myers.
was going to be my joke, and I completely screwed it up.
Or I stepped on it. One of the two.
Yeah, Michael Mayer, 81% of snaps last week. So we saw early on in the year he was trending around 40%, 40 to 50% for the first 4 weeks. He had 81% last week. The team's moving off of Austin Hooper, moving more towards Mayer. 2,700. He had 6 targets for 75 yards last week. And similar to the Broncos, the Bears can't stop anybody either against the tight ends. So he's the guy that I'm looking at this week.
Perfect. Sounds good. And our optimizer also likes Trey McBride at a similar price point, but I think Mayer's just on the field more. McBride's still splitting a little bit with Zach Ertz. You could certainly debate which offense is better or worse there, but I agree with you.
I'm trying to find the next Sam Laporta because this show was all over Laporta early on in the year. and taking that rookie who could emerge. I think both Musgraves and Mayer are those guys.
Agreed there. Yeah, well said. All right. Well, we've gotten through our cash game spots, so let's get into the part of the show where we call our shots and take them here rather than playing it safe. Let's go to GPPs. Let's talk QBs, and then if you guys want, why are we doing it, right? Are we leveraging off of a price point? Are we picking a game that we think will shoot out, even though Vegas says it'll stink? So give us a little color. Phil, why don't you start us with QBs this go around?
Yeah, so I don't think that a lot of people are going to play Russell Wilson in cash. I think most would probably look at him as a GPP play. So for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, I think he'll probably be 4 to 6% or something like that. You could throw him and that game into some GPP lineups. Is
Devin has him at 1.3 right now.
2%.
Okay.
All right.
My list might be old.
Doesn't that make you like him even more?
It does. It's making me doubt my cash game take even more too.
It should.
So yeah, I have Wilson. I have Stafford, who Ryan mentioned earlier for cash. I think he's definitely got a ceiling this week, being tied to Cup. And then if you want to get a little weird, what if you flip that Rams Pittsburgh game and take the Pittsburgh side? So Kenny Pickett is coming off of a bye. His knee should be healthy. He's getting back Deontay Johnson. I like the idea of playing the other side of the popular stack because there's going to be a lot of Rams in lineups this week.
He wears two gloves.
Well, Teddy Bridgewater wore two. Well, that doesn't help me. It doesn't.
Not helping.
No,
yeah. You could pair him with Pickens at 5,500, who I like a lot this week. Johnson at 5,000. Freiermuth at 3,900. I just think that it gives you a lot of ways that you could go with your lineup. You could run a couple of the expensive Rams back and have like a 5-player stack in that game. Really, I just had no one else to say because I can't say Baker Mayfield anymore. I've redacted him from my rankings.
Yeah,
after watching that game last week and having him cost me millions, literally.
Can we talk about good quarterbacks now?
Yeah, go for it.
Patrick Mahomes at 6% rostered, I think is going to be. If he stays at 6%, I think that's pretty crazy. We've seen the Chargers have one of the worst secondaries in the NFL this season. They're allowing the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. They're allowing over 300 yards passing per game, which is 33 yards more than the next closest team. Now, some of that is skewed because of Tua Tagovailoa's like 450 yards back in week 1. But this is a team that brought in J.C. Jackson to try to solidify their defense last year. And it never really happened, and they traded him away. And they have a bunch of just guys who are alongside Asante Samuel Jr., who has been pretty good, but the rest of their secondary in coverage has just been abysmal. You have Michael Davis, who's a veteran who's bounced around, and you have Jasir Taylor, who was a 6th-round pick last year. So I think that this could be a get-right game for Mahomes. The question is, who do you stack him with, which is probably the bigger question that we'll have to answer. But as you're evaluating your quarterbacks this week, you really have to say, am I okay with fading Cooper Kupp, which he's going to be 20+% rostered. And I think you're going to want to, man, it's hard to say you're going to want to fade the best receiver on this slate, but at 9,500, that's a lot for a guy who he's going to have to really get up there for him to pay off. And that's Kupp that I'm referring to. So you're really going to have to think about, okay, how do I build my lineup around Kupp or without Kupp? That's really the first decision that you're going to have to make on this slate. Justin Herbert's just too expensive at 8K. I don't. Maybe that makes him intriguing, but I'd rather just pay up for Mahomes. And then one more name that I'll throw out there. I like Jared Goff at 6,400 at Baltimore. I know I mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs, but the path to Detroit winning this game is through the air, and maybe that's why I like Gibbs is the receiving upside for this week. But Baltimore's run defense is really good. Their secondary has been up and down this year, so I think it's a it's a matchup where I guess their secondary has been better than I thought, but scratch that play. Let's just stick with Mahomes. Let's stick with let's Stafford. I think is fine, but there's nothing here that's gonna I actually think Josh Dobbs is an okay GPP play if he can run for a touchdown. He can hit that. He can hit that value. But let's move on to it. Running backs.
I think I just had a bit of an epiphany as we were both talking through the quarterback position for GPPs, and that is that everybody or most people are going to look at the list of quarterbacks in the same way. And I think they're going to get back to the fact that, like, Mahomes and Herbert, even though they're expensive, are the two that have the highest ceilings and the two that they feel the best about clicking. And then you go and look at the total, and it's the one that's leagues ahead. And I wouldn't be surprised if both of them. I think Mahomes could get up to 12 to 15 in a tournament like the Millie Maker, where there's a lot of public action. And I think that before it's all said and done, even Herbert, who I have projected really low for ownership right now, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in like the 7.5 to 10% range, which is high for quarterback, just because the position is pretty gross.
Yeah, I want to kind of give a shout out to our old colleague John Lee here too, and maybe in future weeks, you guys, I'm not gonna tell you how to run your show, but maybe you should start with wide receivers in this section and base your quarterback plays on that. Because if I'm thinking Mahomes and Herbert, and I'm doing the math that Phil just did, where nobody's clicking them, but the upside, but whatever, I don't want to. Are you gonna? What are you gonna do with the rest of your lineup if you stack Mahomes and Kelsey? Like, what are you going to do if you stack, Herbert and Allen? People are going to play Keenan Allen anyways. So it doesn't even seem like it's shying away from ownership so significantly. And we know that ownership at the quarterback position is a little flatter than the others anyways. So I almost want to reverse engineer the quarterback calls that way, right? So if we are going to start with Mahomes and not go Kelsey, who are you going to stack him with? Maybe we'll get there in wide receivers. The Chiefs don't have another guy that I want to put in a lineup with Mahomes and stack that thing. So I guess with that said, let's move to running backs, and then we'll come back to wide receivers, and maybe we'll have some more quarterback epiphanies. Maybe not. Devin, why don't you start us off on GPP running backs?
Yeah, I think that this is a position that's wide open, which this is going to be probably the position that's going to win someone a lot of money. I think you have a couple guys at the top from a roster percentage: Jahmyr Gibbs, Kenneth Walker, Josh Jacobs, Isaiah Pacheco. Of that group, I mentioned, I think Pacheco is the guy that I do like the most at 6,100. He's a good pivot if that Mahomes and Kelsey stack does become popular. I think Zach Evans is going to be a little bit too popular for me this week. Again, we talked about his upside at the 4K price point, but the reality is we talked about his risk too. And I'd rather go with Roshan Johnson at 4,600 going up against the Raiders this week. Tyson Bagent looked okay last week. He didn't look horrible. He completed, what did he complete? 10 of 14 passes, something like that. Really quick release, gets the ball out fast. So I don't think that this Bears offense suffers all that much. I think they go to a pretty run heavy look, and that could benefit Roshan this week with Khalil Herbert still out. James Cook is another guy that's always interesting. I think that he's going to be someone that people are going to overlook a little bit, as far as a lot of people are looking towards Josh Allen, which I don't fully understand because going up against New England secondary is not something traditionally that I like to do, especially with potentially a negative game script with Buffalo seemingly should be ahead in that game. Aaron Jones is another guy going up against Denver. He hasn't been healthy, but the team just went out and signed James Robinson, which is certainly an indication that A.J. Dillon may not be long for that roster. I think that he's starting, he's had enough chances. He's averaging 3 yards per carry. He's only caught 3 passes on the season. So if Jones comes back, could we see a full complement of workload for the running back? And if he does, then going up against Denver is going to be extremely attractive
You gotta
this
like
week.
that.
This week. So, and then I'll throw one more out there. Browns defense has been amazing so far this year. However, as a Browns fan, we have to look at the offenses that they've faced. They've faced 49ers, the Titans, the Steelers, the Ravens, which put up 28 points against them, and the Bengals when Joe Burrow couldn't barely walk on the field. So Jonathan Taylor is interesting. The Browns linebackers are the weak spot on this team. Their defensive line is very strong. Their secondary is very strong, but they have some undersized guys playing linebacker. They're like 215, 220 pounds. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is the primary guy that I'm talking about. And Taylor caught 5 passes last week. So he's a guy who's going to be less than 10% rostered. He's still one of the better running backs in the league. It's just a question of, is the volume going to be there with the potential split with Zach Moss?
Yeah, I think with Taylor, that usage is going to flip. I mean, you can't like pay a running back all this money and then have him play behind like Zach Moss, So I think they're easing him back in. The usage went up from 2 weeks ago to last week, and this might be like be 1 week early rather than 1 week late situation there. Again, the matchup just stinks though, right? Because I don't linebackers notwithstanding, it doesn't seem like the Colts are going to be able to move the ball really all that well. But Taylor is a guy who could hit a 75-yard touchdown too. So, good call there. You're kind of buying early, if not low, on Jonathan Taylor. One note, just a bit of cleanup. As everybody knows, it's Thursday night. Roschon Johnson still has not practiced with that concussion. Sustained, 2 weeks ago tonight, I think. So that's interesting. I agree the guy's really talented, and they should lean on him with Tyson Bagent of Division II fame playing quarterback. But if he doesn't play, it's going to be pretty hard to lean on him. So just keep your eyes out on that. Phil, anybody that Devin left out in his soliloquy at running back?
Not necessarily. I did have Bears running back, whoever that's going to be. So if it is Deontay Foreman, I think he's fine. He's done a pretty good Derrick Henry impersonation over the last couple of years. He was on the better side of a 60-40 split last week with Darrington Evans. And if they're not trailing like they were against the Vikings, which they might not be because they're going to be facing Aiden O'Connell and Brian Hoyer maybe, Foreman could get himself into a good game script. And I agree with Devin that there's potential in the Bears backfield at a low price point. And that does help you, if you're running a Mahomes lineup or something. Or I guess that's something to think about, right? A lot of the Mahomes lineups that you're going to run into in tournaments are probably going to have that type of build where you're going to see an Evans at the running back. You're going to see a Foreman at running back. So just kind of think of ways to separate if you decide to go that way. Jones was high on my list. And then the only other one that I had, Devin mentioned it for cash games. I think Jerome Ford at 5,100 is a good GPP play also because I think that game is going to be pretty one-sided. I know that Cleveland, like Devin said, is beaten up on some poor offenses, but Gardner Minshew leading the Indianapolis Colts doesn't exactly strike fear into my heart. So I think that the game script should be there for whichever running back the Browns choose to close things out with. And last week it was Ford getting those touches to salt away the easy, or not the easy, but to salt away that win against San Francisco. And he's the more explosive player than Kareem Hunt at this point.
Yep. Yep. So similar situation here that you guys didn't mention, and I don't know if Devin's going to kick me off the show like he would mentioning Baker Mayfield here, but we'll see what you think. Um, Jalen Warren is 5K in Pittsburgh. He also shares a backfield. He's the better player. He just is. I don't care where he was drafted. I don't care where Najee Harris was drafted. Before the team went into the bye, they won that freaky game against the Ravens, and he was the spark plug on the couple drives that led them to actually score points and gain yards. He played in the 2 minute during the end of that game. If they are trailing this game against the Rams, or if for somehow they get up, it might be because they give Jalen Warren a little more run. He also has 4-5, or more catch potential. So again, if we're talking about guys who split a backfield that are 5K, he's in that same Jerome Ford mold to me. Anyways, Devin, you kind of gave me a little, but the upside maybe isn't there. But if the guy gets two-thirds of
The
the
good news
backfield,
for
he could be
Warren
something
is if Kenny Pickett hands the ball with his right hand or his left, it has a glove on it.
That's true.
Extra
But
ball security, baby.
I sure hope he hands it to Jalen Warren instead of Najee Harris, who I'm so tired of watching. All right, let's go to wide receivers. Devin, kick us off with a few GPP.
Let Phil start this time.
All right,
Sure.
Phil, start with wide receivers then.
Yeah, I'll start with Devonte Adams. I think that he's coming off a couple of bad games. He's going to have a backup quarterback thrown to him. He's going to have a popular teammate in Josh Jacobs. So I think he's a decent way to cut the Jacobs chalk. I mean, O'Connell also heavily targeted him in week 4. And I don't know if you've seen his latest interview, but he's the squeaky wheel of the week. He's talking about he wants the ball more. And we've seen that pay off for other players pretty quickly when they speak up. And Adams could be next. I already mentioned the Steelers wide receivers. I like those guys both as kind of standalones and on the opposite side of Ram stacks. Well, I'm not going to talk about Baker Mayfield, but I am going to talk about his receivers. So it's Mayfield by proxy. I like Godwin and Evans. They're coming out really high for me this week. Maybe I just have to tune down like the rating that I give Baker Mayfield before I look at projections. But Mike Evans should have had like 200 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. He comes up really high for me, but I am worried about AJ Terrell, a top 5 cornerback this year, really shutting down opposing wide receiver ones. So if I'm looking at just the spreadsheet, just the numbers, I like Mike Evans, but the matchup does make me think twice. And because of that, I think that Chris Godwin might be the better play at 6,900. I like the idea in tournaments of taking this game and doing like little secondary stacks, in addition to my main stack. So you could take a guy like London and pair him with an Evans or a Godwin. You could take a Bijan Robinson and pair him with an Evans or a Godwin. One of those guys is going to get there unless Mayfield just continues to flat out miss them every single time, like he did last week. And then the only other name on my list here is a one-off play because I don't like the game environment even a little bit, but Gabe Davis at 5,900. The Patriots have been pretty successful defending wide receiver ones this year. A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, C.D. Lamb, Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, all of these guys are high-end wide receiver ones who did not find much success against the Patriots. So I'm assuming that they're going to look to take away Stephon Diggs. Good luck with that, the way he's been playing. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but it could be that more of Josh Allen's production shifts to Gabe Davis and the tight ends in this spot. For what it's worth, Davis had 17 targets in 2 games against New England last year. So maybe there's a little something to it.
Phil, I'd like to thank you for mentioning a University of Central Florida player that checks in the mail. Devin, who do you like at wide receiver?
Yeah, Phil
on my 1 week here, we mentioned a UCF guy. You gotta love it.
Phil mentioned a lot of guys that I like. I'm going to throw a couple more though. DJ Moore, I think, is interesting. We saw 8 targets last week with Begent. And Begent, like, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this guy's name right.
I've heard it 5 different ways this week.
As a diehard college football fan, I don't follow Shepherd University. So, yeah, I think that he's a guy who is he going to be worse than Justin Fields throwing the ball? Maybe, but he was 10 of
Probably.
14 last week. If they have issues at the quarterback position, I think that it's one that we could see DJ Moore get 10 plus targets. I think another guy that I like this week is, I mean, I'm going to talk about Cooper Kupp some more, but I don't really need to. I think he's a guy that I'm going to have in every lineup because the Steelers are trash. And
Had to do that to me too.
I mean, I'm just stat based. Like it's
That's
not
it.
personal. It's not personal. And then Christian Watson for Green Bay, 5,600. Yeah, he's been banged up all season, but we've seen when he's active, he's a deep threat that can go over the top. And Denver's defense is one of the worst in the NFL. So I think he's interesting. And then I'm trying to go through and find a guy for Kansas City that's not named Travis Kelce. And it's just
Thank you.
It's just brutal. Like, I don't know.
This is kind of the point I was trying to make earlier. Is like
it has to be Rashee Rice. Like it
has to be.
Yep.
Man,
Justin
really
Watson is out for them, right? Who doesn't like catch balls, but he gets on the field. So
but
presumably, if he's not on the field, Rice might get on the field.
4,700, Rice doesn't have to do all that much.
Yeah,
to get to 3.5x, 4x.
And he's been their best receiver. It just hasn't earned him more playing time, which is super weird.
Yeah.
But he's been their best one.
Yeah. So
Rice was who I was trying to tease an Easter egg here earlier when I was talking about Mahomes. Because he shows up, again, looking at our optimizers, he shows up and keeps popping up too. And I'm just, it's tough. But if you're doing it in GPPs, you can build yourself a case. So Devin, you mentioned Moore and Watson, both of whom, 13% for Moore, 15% for Watson. Any concerns about those figures? I mean, I'd much rather have Watson at 15 than Kendrick Bourne at 16. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But any thoughts there?
No, I think 15 is fine. You can take these guys who are in that range. You don't have to take every player as a 4% dart on every single spot. It's just being smart in like saying, I'm going to take a couple of these guys and build a lineup that does give me some differentiation. But will DJ Moore end up in the 13% range? I think he probably falls down to 9 to 10.
Yeah.
But, I like him better than Amari Cooper at 3%. So it's just like, I don't want to take all darts. I think that there's enough variability at the quarterback position. We talked about Dobbs. We talked about Russell Wilson. Both those guys are like 3%, if that. And running backs, there's opportunities as well. And then tight ends, people aren't going to be on Michael Mayer. So,
yeah.
One thing to keep an eye on too that I forgot to mention was that in Seattle, no practice for DK Metcalf yet this week. So
JSN?
Jackson Smith and Jigba would be the guy at 3,900. We already saw his usage ramp up a little bit last week. If Metcalf were to sit out, that becomes mega chalk, but also pretty exciting. I know that I'd want to play him.
You had to mention an Ohio State guy. They are hard to find in the NFL. You had to go find one, Phil.
Yeah.
Got to even things out, right? So, yeah, no, I like that. That's interesting with Metcalf. Obviously, yeah, JSN would become the chalk, but maybe worthwhile chalk at that. So, time's ticking on, gentlemen. So let's move on to tight ends. Who wants to start?
Kyle Pitts week?
Is it ever?
4K? I mean, I don't think he's a bad play. I don't think he's a great play, but if we think about Tampa Bay and the inability it's the same rationale for liking Drake London. I don't think that Atlanta's going to be able to run the ball all that well against Tampa Bay. So give me some of their pass catchers. And then I think if you're not going Pitts and you're not going with Kelsey, I think it's Michael Mayer at 2,700. He's going to be about 4% rostered. I think he has just as good of chances outscoring Luke Musgrave who's going to be chalk at 17% this week. So that's how I'm approaching it.
Yeah. How about also, you did not mention Mark Andrews, and usually going up in price at tight end is a good GPP strategy because nobody wants to. And you also have Zay Flowers is our highest percent rostered receiver. So is that worth a pivot?
When is Andrews going to have his breakout? Like he had 80 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Browns, which I guess
Yeah,
like you could
as
say
someone
that
as someone who has him on a few season long teams, I'm asking the same question. Phil, any thoughts on tight end?
Not that many. I think last week when Dan Pinch hit, I said that my note said just play whoever you want because it doesn't really matter. I mean, this position stinks every week. I kind of just have kept that note there. It's now evergreen. I don't mind. I think that you actually have Andrews right because if anybody's looking to spend money at tight end, it's going to be to get up to Kelsey.
Yeah.
So uh, right away, just plugging Andrews into a lineup gets you building in a different direction than the field, and he obviously has upside, even if he's been much more missed than hit this season. Um, there's Kelsey, of course. You kind of have to get some exposure to his ceiling at that position if you're building a little, what's the word I'm looking for, a portfolio of lineups. And the only other guy that I've got here, and this is more so if, um, man, I'm losing it here. Excuse me.
you having a stroke.
if Deshaun Watson plays, which it looks like he now might, I like David Njoku. He's a price pivot off of Musgrave at 3,400
Yep.
to Musgrave's 33, and the Indy secondary is like really really bad. So I could see that happening, but if it's PJ Walker to Njoku, just kind of forget about it.
Yep. All right. Sounds good. Speaking of when will the breakout happen? Darren Waller. When will that happen? Maybe Washington, who gave up 8 catches, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns to Atlanta tight ends last week. Granted, that was pretty volume driven, but you get a great athlete against a bad defense.
We've spent way
that
too long talking about tight ends.
nobody's
Yeah,
going to play.
Play whoever you want.
Yep, play whoever you want. Doesn't matter, as Phil said. All right, gentlemen, we're through the selections. So you've probably teased some stacks here and there, but let's just get them out there now and be clear to the people. Who are your favorite stacks, Phil?
I think it is the game stack that I mentioned with the Rams and the Steelers. So you could go, but you're going to have to do some work to make it unique. So I think you want to go overboard on that game. So if you're playing Stafford Cup, which is clear chalk, throw in Tyler Higbee at tight end, throw in a pair of Steelers players on the other end, and that combination is going to be played a lot less. But that seems to me the place to go.
I wouldn't pair Cup with anybody because Cup will have. I would find differentiation elsewhere. I mean, Cup could have 70% of the targets this week. Like it's not.
Yeah,
It just
could get
wouldn't
ugly
surprise.
there.
It just wouldn't surprise me. I'm gonna go. Man, I'm gonna go Desmond Ritter and Drake London. I like what Atlanta's doing. I don't think that they're going to be able to run the ball. I've been saying that all show. I think that this could be a little bit of a breakout for the Atlanta Falcons. And then Tyson Bagent and DJ. No, I'm just kidding. I do like DJ Moore as my favorite value play this week. Favorite upside play, under the radar, whatever we want to call it. I do. He's going to end up a little bit popular, but at 6,500, he's going to get 12 plus targets.
Yeah, even on the road, the Atlanta stack, huh? They seem to be a home road splits team at this point, but that's tough to swallow, which means not many people will have it, right? So, good call. All right, real quick, favorite value play, maybe, I don't know, 4K or below, at a flex position, not a tight end. Let's not cheat because tight ends don't matter, as Phil said. Devin, your favorite punt play, bargain basement guy this week.
Can I just go Jerome Ford at 5,100? I don't think that counts.
No,
but
I said 4,000 or below. And
Michael
let's
Mayer?
not even say Zach Evans because we already talked about him too.
There's not like another guy. I mean, Curtis Samuel's probably the only other guy, and I probably just took Phil's, but there's just not a lot that I love under that price point.
Yep. I think that says a lot about this week. So it's good exercise, even if we can't complete it. Phil, any thoughts on punt plays?
Yeah, I took the easy way out. We stopped talking about defenses on this show, and the one play that stood out to me as a great value is the Chiefs defense at 2,400. They're just too cheap for how well they've played, despite the tough matchup against the Chargers. They're favored at home, and it's hard to think of too many scenarios where they don't land you 5 or 6 points at 2,400. So that's one way that I was making the cash game lineup that I had work. So Chiefs defense, great value.
Yep, good, sound maneuver. Do you remember the days where you could take the Chiefs defense at Arrowhead and you'd get the Tyreek Hill bonus for like a punt return or kick return or whatever too? That was fun.
Mecole Hardman is back, so you never know.
Yeah, I wouldn't bank on that, Phil. All right, guys. Any parting thoughts before we wrap this evening? And I'll give mine, I guess. Thanks for having me back and letting me pinch hit. It's been fun to get back in the mix. Hear you guys kind of talk a little trash to each other and to me, which believe it or not, I do miss, Devin. So appreciate you treating me like you always have. So thanks.
Yeah, the seat is always warm. You're always welcome. Even if we have 3, we can always have a 4th. So
appreciate that, Phil. Anything before we wrap?
Good luck, and thank you for being a football guy. Or is that your line?
No, that's fine. We'll take it. That's how we end the show. Bye, everybody.
Perfect.
Check out Football Guys.